Discover how Stoic wisdom transforms modern struggles into growth. The craftsman doesn't rush. Hour after hour, day after day, his chisel strikes the marble, each tap a deliberate choice, each mistake an opportunity. Michelangelo once said the sculpture already exists within the stone. He merely removes what doesn't belong. This is the essence of mastery, the recognition that greatness isn't achieved through frantic motion, but through patient transformation. Now look at your own life. The notifications pinging, the deadlines looming, the constant pressure to be more, do more, achieve more immediately. We live in a world that has forgotten the simple truth that mastery requires time, failure, and above all, a relationship with difficulty that most of us have never learned to cultivate. When was the last time you welcomed failure as a teacher rather than avoided it as an enemy? Epictetus, the former slave who became one of history's greatest Stoic philosophers, captured this perspective in words that have echoed through centuries. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Consider this wisdom not as some ancient platitude, but as a radical reframing of our relationship with difficulty. The interview rejection isn't just disappointment, it's information. The failed relationship isn't just heartbreak, it's guidance. The business setback isn't just loss, it's redirection. What the Stoics understood, that we've largely forgotten, is that our power lies not in controlling external events, but in mastering our response to them. Sarah, a software engineer I spoke with recently, described being laid off from her dream job during the tech downsizing of 2023. My first reaction was panic, then anger, she said. But after sitting with those emotions, I asked myself, what can I learn here? What skills had I neglected? What opportunities might this create? 6 months later, she had launched her own consulting practice, something she'd never have done without that initial shock. This is the mastery mindset in action. Not toxic positivity that denies difficulty, but a clear-eyed assessment that asks, how can I use this? In Silicon Valley, the concept of failing forward has become something of a cliché, but the ancient Stoics were teaching this mindset millennia ago. Seneca, advisor to emperors, lost everything multiple times throughout his life, facing exile, the death of loved ones, and eventually being ordered to take his own life by Nero. Yet in his writings, he continuously returns to the idea that difficulty is the gymnasium in which we build strength of character. Fire tests gold. Misfortune tests, brave men. Think about the people you most admire. Did they achieve what they have through ease or through adversity overcome? The master in any field is not the person who avoided difficulty, but the one who developed a relationship with it, who learned to see obstacles not as burdens, but as the very material from which mastery is forged. Consider Marcus Aurelius, writing his meditations while leading armies and governing an empire during plague and war. His journals reveal a man constantly wrestling with challenges, reminding himself, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Now, bring this ancient wisdom to your modern challenges. The promotion that went to someone else, the relationship that fell apart, the morning anxiety that greets you before your feet hit the floor. The mastery mindset asks, what if these difficulties aren't obstacles to your growth, but the essential soil from which it springs? This perspective transforms how we approach learning itself. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset, the belief that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, echoes Stoic principles. Those with a growth mindset embrace challenges, persist through obstacles, see effort as the path to mastery, learn from criticism, and find inspiration in others' success rather than feeling threatened by it. Today's hustle culture sells us the illusion of overnight success. Social media shows us only the highlight reels of others' lives. But true mastery has always required the same ingredients: time, deliberate practice, and a willingness to fail repeatedly in the service of growth. Consider the pandemic, that upended our world. Some people were broken by it, others were merely inconvenienced, but some, those with the mastery mindset, found within that global disruption the seed of transformation. They built new businesses, developed new skills, deepened relationships, or simply cultivated greater resilience. Same external circumstance, radically different internal response. This is what Epictetus meant. We cannot control the marble, only how we work with it. So what difficult circumstance are you facing right now? What obstacle feels most insurmountable? What failure most haunts you? The mastery mindset invites you to look at it again, not as evidence of your limitations, but as the raw material from which your future strength is being carved. The great paradox of mastery is this: the more you embrace difficulty rather than avoid it, the less power it has over you. Each obstacle overcome becomes evidence of your capacity. Each failure metabolized becomes fuel for growth. The sculptor doesn't curse the hardness of the stone. The athlete doesn't resent the resistance of the weight. And the person cultivating mastery doesn't reject life's difficulties. They recognize them as the very conditions necessary for becoming who they're capable of being. What stone are you working with today? And how might you strike it differently? Picture a student hunched over textbooks at 3 a.m., coffee cups scattered across the desk, eyes burning from fatigue. The information refuses to stick. Frustration builds. The student studies harder, longer, pushing through exhaustion, yet the results remain disappointing. Despite monumental effort, true learning seems to slip through their fingers like water. This scene plays out in dorm rooms, offices, and homes across the world every day. We've been taught to value hard work, to grind, to push through, but rarely have we been taught how to learn effectively. The cruel irony is that many of us will spend decades in educational institutions without ever learning the science of learning itself. Seneca, writing nearly 2,000 years ago, recognized this paradox. People say that they want to learn, but what they really want is to be finished with learning. We chase credentials and completion rather than understanding. We optimize for short-term memory and test performance rather than lasting wisdom. The ancient Stoics understood something profound about learning that modern cognitive science has only recently confirmed. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Teaching is learning twice over. When we attempt to teach something, we expose the gaps in our own understanding." The Stoics practiced this by writing dialogues with themselves, engaging with ideas as both student and teacher. This insight mirrors what neuroscientists now call retrieval practice, the act of pulling information from memory rather than simply reviewing it. Every time we retrieve knowledge, we strengthen the neural pathways that make that information accessible in the future. Consider the difference between two students, one who reads a chapter 5 times in succession and another who reads it once, then closes the book and tries to explain the concepts to someone else. Research consistently shows the second student will retain significantly more information, despite spending less time with the material. But effective learning isn't just about technique. It's about our relationship with failure and difficulty. Marcus Aurelius counseled, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In learning, this wisdom is strikingly relevant when we encounter difficulty in understanding a concept, when our brain struggles. That struggle itself strengthens learning. Cognitive scientists call this desirable difficulty. Just as muscles grow stronger when subjected to resistance, our minds develop more robust neural connections when learning requires effort. This explains why interleaving, mixing up different but related topics, rather than studying one subject at a time, produces better long-term mastery despite feeling more difficult. A tennis player who practices serves, volleys, and backhand shots in an unpredictable sequence learns more effectively than one who drills each skill separately for hours. The Stoic acceptance of discomfort as a pathway to growth aligns perfectly with effective learning strategies. Epictetus taught that it is difficulties that show what people are. Learning should feel challenging. If it doesn't, you're likely not learning deeply enough. Consider how this applies to your own life. Think about something you've truly mastered. Did you acquire that skill through passive consumption of information, or through active engagement, practice, failure, and retrieval? A software engineer I know built his expertise not by reading programming books cover to cover, but by taking on projects slightly beyond his capabilities, struggling through problems, teaching concepts to junior developers, and revisiting fundamentals at spaced intervals. The difficulty, the frustration of debugging code at midnight, wasn't an obstacle to his learning. It was the very mechanism of his growth. Similarly, spaced repetition, reviewing information at increasing intervals, harnesses the brain's natural forgetting curve to strengthen memory. A medical student using spaced repetition flashcards might review a concept today, then in 3 days, then a week later, then a month later. This approach requires planning and patience, virtues the Stoics prized highly. Seneca observed that time discovers truth. Learning deeply is not about cramming or speed, it's about deliberate engagement over time. The most powerful learning happens when we give our minds the space to process, connect, and integrate information. The Stoics also understood something modern students often forget. The purpose of learning is not to impress others, but to transform oneself. We should not study to impart our knowledge, Seneca wrote, but to improve ourselves. True learning changes how we think, perceive, and act in the world. This perspective shifts how we approach learning. Instead of asking, how can I memorize this for the test, we ask, how might this knowledge change how I live? Instead of skimming for keywords, we engage deeply with concepts, connecting them to what we already know, challenging our assumptions, and finding applications in daily life. What learning challenge are you facing right now? How might you approach it differently? Perhaps you could explain the concept to someone else, even if only an imaginary student. Maybe you could space your study sessions rather than cramming. You might interleave related topics instead of exhausting yourself on a single subject. The science of learning offers us tools, but the Stoic philosophy offers us purpose. We learn not to accumulate information, but to become better versions of ourselves, more thoughtful, more capable, more wise. What learning practice might you adopt today that would honor both the science and the wisdom of those who came before us? Imagine, for a moment, the greatest works of human achievement. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, pennied by candlelight in military camps along the Danube. Einstein's theory of relativity, developed during his focused hours at the Swiss Patent Office. Michelangelo on his back, alone with the Sistine Chapel ceiling for years on end. These were not produced in 5-minute bursts between checking messages. They weren't created through multitasking or in environments filled with pings, notifications, and endless distractions. These works were born in the crucible of what we now call deep work, the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task. In our hyperconnected world, this state has become increasingly rare, increasingly valuable, and increasingly difficult to access. Yet, it remains the superpower that separates those who merely stay busy from those who create lasting value. Look at your own life. How many times have you ended a day exhausted, having responded to dozens of emails, attended multiple meetings, scrolled through countless feeds, yet feeling as if you've accomplished nothing of significance? This is the paradox of our age. We are simultaneously overworked and underproductive. We confuse activity with achievement, movement with progress. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and Stoic philosopher, understood this problem nearly 2,000 years ago. In his personal writings, he admonished himself, "Concentrate every minute like a Roman, like a man, on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness, tenderly, willingly, with justice. And on freeing yourself from all other distractions. He wasn't struggling with Instagram or email, but the human mind has always been susceptible to distraction. The external forms change, but the internal battle remains the same. What Marcus understood was that our attention is the most precious resource we possess, and that deploying it with intention is not just a productivity technique, but a moral imperative. Deep work is not merely about getting things done. It's about bringing the full power of your cognitive capabilities to bear on something worthy of that effort. It's about creating value that couldn't exist otherwise. And in a world that increasingly rewards rare and valuable skills, the ability to perform deep work is becoming a significant economic advantage. But beyond economics, there is something profoundly satisfying about immersing yourself completely in a challenging task. Psychologists call this state flow, when time seems to stretch or compress, when your sense of self temporarily dissolves, when you are fully present with the work at hand. These are the moments when we feel most alive, most human, yet we live in an environment actively hostile to deep work. The average person checks their phone 96 times a day, once every 10 minutes of waking life. Each interruption isn't just a moment lost. It's the destruction of a mental context that might have taken 15 minutes to build. Studies show it takes 23 minutes, on average, to fully recover from even a minor interruption. What would the Stoics say about this modern predicament? They would remind us that external circumstances, including our technological environment, are largely beyond our control. What remains within our control is how we respond. As Epictetus would say, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. This is where practice becomes essential. Deep work is not merely a decision, it's a skill developed through deliberate practice. Here, Stoicism offers powerful guidance. The Stoics emphasized the development of habits and routines that align with our deepest values. They understood that willpower alone is insufficient. We must design our lives to make virtue, or in this case, focused attention, the path of least resistance, begin by creating sacred spaces for deep work, physical environments free from distractions, with clear signals to both yourself and others that this is time for focused effort. Turn off notifications. Disconnect from the internet if possible. Use tools like timers to create boundaries around your work periods. Structure your day around your cognitive rhythms. Most people have 3 to 4 hours of peak cognitive capacity each day. Identify when those hours occur for you and jealously guard them for your most important work. As Seneca wrote, life is long enough, and it has been given in sufficiently generous measure to allow the accomplishment of the very greatest things, if the whole of it is well invested. Notice he says well invested, not fully scheduled. Practice what modern psychology calls attention residue management. When switching tasks, take a moment to consciously close one mental context before opening another. Write down where you left off and what needs to happen next. This simple practice can dramatically reduce the cognitive drag of context switching. Perhaps most importantly, remember that deep work is not just about productivity, it's about presence. It's about bringing your whole self to bear on something worthy of your attention. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Give yourself a gift, the present moment." Deep work is one way we unwrap that gift. Consider this. In your final hours, looking back on your life, what will matter most? The number of emails you responded to, how quickly you cleared notifications, or will it be the meaningful work you created, the problems you solved, the wisdom you developed through sustained focus and effort? The next time you sit down to work, ask yourself, is this worthy of my full attention? If the answer is yes, then give it nothing less. Turn off the distractions, set a timer, and for that period, no matter how brief, be fully present with the task at hand. This is not just productivity advice. It's a path toward a more meaningful existence. What moments in your life have felt most rewarding, most alive with possibility? Chances are they were moments of deep engagement, when you were neither distracted nor divided, but wholly present. That state is available to you today, right now, if you choose to claim it. The screen opens with a close-up shot of a smartphone displaying a breaking news alert. We see a person's thumb hovering over the share button, trembling slightly. The camera pulls back to reveal a face twisted with outrage, eyes narrowed, breathing quickened voiceover. In the time it takes you to feel offended by something you've read online, your brain has already made a dozen unconscious judgments. But how many of them are actually true? The scene shifts to a time-lapse of a crowded city street, people moving like currents in a river, each following invisible patterns. We make approximately 35,000 decisions every single day. Most of them happen below our conscious awareness. And yet, these automatic judgments shape our reality, determine our happiness, and dictate the course of our lives. A quote appears on screen. People are disturbed not by things, but by their judgments about things. Epictetus, the ancient Stoics, understood something profound about the human mind that modern neuroscience is only now catching up to. Reality and our perception of reality are not the same thing. The map is not the territory cut to a scene of someone looking at a map on their phone while standing in a forest, clearly lost. When Epictetus taught that suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events, he wasn't just offering philosophical comfort. He was describing the architecture of human consciousness itself. The scene transitions to a simple animation showing neural pathways lighting up in a brain. Your brain is constantly filtering reality through your beliefs, fears, and assumptions. It's creating shortcuts, what psychologists now call cognitive biases, that help you process information quickly, but not always accurately. Cut to a split screen of two people watching the exact same political speech, with completely different emotional reactions. Consider confirmation bias. Our tendency to notice and remember information that confirms what we already believe. Or availability bias, judging probability based on how easily examples come to mind rather than actual statistics. Or perhaps the most dangerous, the bias blind spot, the conviction that everyone else is biased, but not a montage of social media arguments, news debates, and family disagreements plays briefly. The Stoics proposed a radical solution to this problem. The discipline of assent. Before reacting to any impression or judgment, pause, question it, examine it with reason. As Marcus Aurelius advised, first, don't be disturbed by it. Nothing happens to anyone that they can't endure. Second, consider what this thing is at its foundations. Scene shifts to someone taking a deep breath before responding to an inflammatory text message. Critical thinking isn't just an academic exercise, it's the practical art of mental freedom. When you learn to separate what happens from your judgment about what happens, you gain the power to choose your response rather than being driven by automatic reactions. Cut to a person deliberately putting down their phone and walking away from an online argument. The Stoic approach to critical thinking involves several practical steps. First, recognize the difference between facts and interpretations. My partner didn't text me back is a fact. My partner doesn't care about me is an interpretation. The scene shifts to someone writing in a journal, carefully separating observations from conclusions. Second, question your assumptions by asking, what evidence supports this belief? What evidence contradicts it? What alternative explanations might exist? As Seneca wrote, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, usually because our imaginations run unchecked by critical inquiry cut to a person mentally playing out worst-case scenarios, then deliberately stopping to consider more balanced possibilities. Third, practice the Stoic technique of view from above, stepping back from your immediate emotional response to see the situation in broader context. Is this truly as important as it feels in this moment? How might this look from a different perspective? Or a year from now, the camera pulls up from a person staring anxiously at their phone to show them as just one tiny figure in a vast cityscape. But perhaps most challenging is applying these principles in the moments when we are most emotionally triggered, when our amygdala hijacks our prefrontal cortex. When the story seems so convincing that we forget it's a story at all, cut to someone taking 3 deep breaths before continuing a difficult conversation. Epictetus taught that the beginning of philosophy is the recognition of our own weaknesses. Critical thinking begins not with confidence in our judgments, but with humility about them. The willingness to say, "I might be wrong." Scene shifts to diverse people engaged in thoughtful conversation, listening more than speaking. In a world of algorithmic echo chambers and emotional manipulation, the ability to think critically isn't just a philosophical nicety. It's essential armor for your mind. It's the difference between being controlled by circumstances and maintaining your inner freedom regardless of them. The camera returns to the opening scene, the person about to share the outrage-inducing post. This time we see them pause, take a breath, and click away from the post. Instead, what judgments are currently causing you suffering? Which of your deeply held beliefs have you never truly examined? What would happen if, just for today, you approached your own thoughts with the same skepticism you apply to the thoughts of those you disagree with? Fade to a quiet scene of reflection. Perhaps someone walking alone. In nature, the practice of critical thinking doesn't promise you'll always find the absolute truth. But it does promise something perhaps more valuable, the freedom to choose your response to life, rather than being driven by unconscious judgments. And in that space between stimulus and response, as the Stoics knew, lies our opportunity for growth, wisdom, and inner peace. The books lie scattered across the desk, dog-eared, marked with notes in the margins. A hand picks up a weathered copy of Meditations, the spine cracked from years of opening to the same passages. But what good is wisdom locked away in the pages of a book? What purpose does knowledge serve if it dies with us? Consider the oak tree. It doesn't grow tall and strong for itself alone. It produces thousands of acorns over its lifetime, most of which will never become trees. Yet it continues this work of potential creation, season after season, without guarantee of success. The oak doesn't mourn the acorns that fail to take root. It simply continues its purpose, to reach toward the light and to scatter its seeds. Marcus Aurelius understood this when he wrote, "We were born to work together, like feet, hands, and eyes, like the 2 rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural." This wasn't mere poetic language. It was a foundational understanding that humans exist as social creatures whose actions ripple outward, touching countless lives we'll never see. Think about the last idea that changed your life. Where did it come from? A book, a conversation, a teacher who saw something in you that you couldn't yet see yourself. That wisdom didn't originate with them. They were merely a vessel, passing along something they had received. And now it lives in you. We all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. Every technique we use, every insight we apply, every tool that makes our lives easier, all gifts from people who chose to share rather than hoard their knowledge. Many of those benefactors remain nameless to us, yet their legacy lives on in how we think, work, and solve problems. The Stoics recognized this debt we owe to others. Seneca wrote extensive letters to friends offering guidance, not to display his wisdom, but because he believed knowledge unshared was knowledge wasted. Epictetus, once a slave, devoted his freedom to teaching others. And Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, still took time to remind himself of his social duty, writing thoughts never intended for public consumption that now guide millions. In our algorithm-driven world, we've grown accustomed to customized content, personalized recommendations, and echo chambers that reflect our existing beliefs. We consume information like fast food, quickly and privately, but wisdom isn't meant to be a solitary feast. It grows through exchange, challenge, and application. Consider Sarah, a middle manager who discovered Stoic practices during a period of burnout. The principles of focusing on what she could control transformed not just her work life, but her relationship with her teenage son. Their conversations shifted from cycles of frustration to genuine exchanges. She didn't lecture him about philosophy, she simply embodied its principles. Years later, her son would tell her that watching her transformation gave him permission to approach his own challenges differently. Or Michael, a teacher who incorporated one simple Stoic practice into his classroom, a morning reflection on intention. His students weren't interested in ancient philosophy, but this small ritual created a pause between their chaotic home lives and the demands of school. One student later wrote to say this practice had become her anchor through college and beyond. Michael never knew the full extent of his influence, but the seeds were planted. This is how wisdom propagates, not always through books or formal teaching, but through lived example. When we practice discernment instead of judgment, courage instead of comfort, acceptance instead of resistance, others notice. They may not adopt our exact path, but we create permission for them to find their own. What flows through one of us flows through all of us, Marcus Aurelius reflected. Each insight we gain and share becomes part of humanity's collective inheritance. Each story we tell about overcoming our own struggles might be exactly what someone else needs to hear precisely when they need to hear it. Your life is already leaving impressions on others. The question is not whether you will leave a legacy, but what kind it will be. Will you bury your wisdom in the ground like a fearful servant, or will you invest it in others, allowing it to multiply? Think about the person who most influenced your understanding of what matters in life. How did they share their wisdom with you? Was it through formal teaching, casual conversation, or simply through how they lived? Now consider who might see you in that same light. Who is watching how you handle disappointment, success, conflict, or change? Your legacy won't be built primarily through grand gestures. It grows through daily choices. The colleague you mentor, the friend you listen to without judgment, the family traditions that carry your values forward, the social media post that offers substance in a sea of superficiality. The Stoics would remind us that we cannot control how our wisdom will be received or whether our name will be remembered. What we can control is our intention and our willingness to share what we've learned, both our successes and our failures. So ask yourself, what wisdom have I gained that might serve others? What hard-won lessons sit dormant within me? Where might I plant these seeds without attachment to how or when they might grow? This is the quiet work of legacy, tending your own garden while scattering seeds that may bloom long after you're gone, in places you'll never see. Explore more Stoic insights. Subscribe and share your thoughts below.